first off, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, Quayat, Kwaglan, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen peoples, on whose traditional unceded territories our three campuses reside. In this session, I am going to provide an overview of just some basic tips about money and budgeting, an overview of SFU-based financial aid, and I will speak to government funding. So 2/3 of the presentation is applicable for both Canadian and domestic students, and the last part is more directed towards Canadian students. If there is any American students here, SFU is a Title IV school, so students can apply for US student loan funding to attend. And if you have any, as I mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Anastasia here is going to be keeping an eye on that. Maybe give me a poke and say, Karen, there's a great question. I'd hope to get my act together to do some Menti to ask some questions of the room, but I am sorry I did not. So bear with me, it isn't interactive. You may find that there's a couple of screens. I may not go through every single bullet point. And that's where our phones are perfect, take a picture. But yeah, so just some really general information. And again, safe place, there's no silly questions. One of the best qualities I find is curiosity. So feel free to ask away. So no one likes talking about money or budgeting. I could show a whole bunch of different ways on how you should track how you spend. We talk about a spending plan. That is just a fancy word for a budget. If you ever want to start trying to do a budget, how it works for me is I have this monthly budget and a rolling, even now, many years after not being in post-secondary, I think of the year in terms. So it's January to April, May to August, September to December. So I think of my life in 4-month chunks. And so whether or not it's a month-based budget or a term-based budget, because you've got some expenses that are per term, you have some yearly expenses, you've got your monthly expenses, just to give you an idea of where your money's going. If you've never done it, I would encourage you to write down or use notes in your phone and track what you spend your money on. It's really interesting. I've always used the example, if you went to Starbucks twice a week and you bought yourself a mocha, over 2 terms, you've just spent $765 on coffee. That could get you to Vegas. That could buy you a really, really fancy coffee machine, and you can make them at home with organic beans and high-end milk. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes it really all depends. What's your priority? Because if that's the hill you're going to die on, and that's how you bribe yourself to go to school and go to work and get everything done, so be it. But there's always another, there's not always another way, because you still have to pay rent, you still have to eat. But is there a better way to achieve your goals? And so for me, that's kind of what I think about when I do a budget. There is no right and wrong, because we can tell you what you should do. And then the reality is you're going to go buy a bag of gum, and you might go to a movie, and then you might spend $25 on popcorn because you had a bad week. Or you wrote a great exam, right? So I think part of it when you do a budget is being honest, because there's the ideal and then there's what we do, and we all get in our own way. So there is no right or wrong. Figure out what works, whether or not it's, whether or not it's Excel, or go on Pinterest, look up some budgets. And in here, I'm going to show you a couple of websites that I have found useful, but there is no right or wrong way. It's what works for you. And I would also encourage you to have a talk about your educational goals. The fact that you guys are here means you guys are already thinking about this stuff, because I think that you need to have a financial plan that goes hand in hand with your ed plan. I kind of laugh because I was talking to a friend who has teenage kids, and she's starting to panic because they're starting to talk about post-secondary. And there's all these people have all these ideas. And I said, well, remember your birth plan? And I assume most of you guys don't have kids, but when you have kids, they want you to sit down and make a birth plan of how you want childbirth to go. Let me tell you, the first pain comes on, and let me tell you that birth plan, gone. A budget and an ed plan is a lot like that too, because the living of it all of a sudden makes you go, I need to rethink about this. So it's perfectly normal. But when you have a plan, when it all goes sideways, at least you can go to the plan and go, okay, what did I learn and how do I shift? Because that's life. We do that ongoing. We blow our budget for Christmas. We spend too much on books. You shift. You drop your cell phone, you crack your screen, you either live with it or you buy an OtterBox. Do you know what I mean? So it's trying to forgive yourself, but also work with yourself. But figure out your ed goals. How long do you plan to be in school? Are you taking the summers off? Are you going to do an exchange? Are you going to do co-op? What does it look like? So these are just questions that whether or not you do it, as I kind of laughed when I said, when I look at budgeting, I still think in quarter or like, you know, three periods per year. But at the end of those periods, when you're finishing your classes, you're planning your next ones, reflect on what worked, what didn't work. Is this plan still in place? And do you need to shift? I found that I was doing bachelor's in science and biology, and then I took genetics and I went to English. So you have no idea what's going to happen along the way. One of a really good website that I like to talk about in terms of money and budgeting is the Canadian Financial Literacy website through Canada.ca. And it's a great website. It is boring. This is the stuff that they should teach you in high school. This is the stuff your parents should know. This website literally has everything everything you need. It has tools and calculators, debt and borrowing, education funding, managing your money, how to buy your first car, how to deal with fraud and scams. This is actually an awesome website. Boring, horrible, read it before bed. But it's a great website. And it's one that I wish I knew, because it's one that if you don't know about it and we do a terrible job of teaching it, and it doesn't matter what background you come from, parents don't want to talk about money with their kids. We have a hard time teaching our kids. And it's kind of like where your mom or dad always tells you, turn off the lights. Don't, wash in cold. They don't really tell you that it costs that much more money because to do all those things. But that's sort of where this is in a wonderful, wonderful website. So big plug for Canada.ca money. Everything you kind of need to know about financial literacy. Here's also some really, really good budgeting tool websites that we have found that works for us. Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, Mint, My Money Coach, ABC, Learning Hub. These are great. They're great resources. Again, there's a whole bunch because everyone gets a good idea. I want to do a financial literacy website. I want to teach people how to manage their money. And then the next one comes out. And so that's where I tend to anchor back to that Canada.ca money website, because it is a website that is a priority for the government of Canada and they keep it current. Also, the Canadian Association of Student Financial Awards personnel works with the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada to provide that student voice to make sure that it's also relevant for different age groups. So that money.ca website isn't just for students, it's for Canadians. Whether or not you're young or old, it helps you sort of plan through each of those stages of your life. So I would just explore stuff. And again, find one that speaks to you. There is no one-stop shop to learn everything you need to know. Here's some tips that we've compiled about reducing your spending. Kind of like I was talking about, I really like coffee. So I have a really good machine. I got it just before COVID, and I think it was a godsend because I could make really good coffee at home. But pick your battles. Buy used, eat at home. I had a student years ago who came and needed emergency funding. They were a family of 5. And when I asked him for his bank statements, and I realized that every month he was spending $2,500 a month at Tim Hortons, 7-Eleven, Max, McDonald's. Do you think I felt a lot of pity about their financial position? It's way different when you spend $500 at Safeway than it is, frankly, buying overpriced food that has zero worth to it. So again, pick your battles. Getting that big bag of rice and a big bag of kidney beans, and a box full of coffee goes a lot farther than other stuff. So sometimes it's just how you rethink stuff. Eating at home, watch that impulse shopping. You have a credit card, freeze it, put it in the freezer, literally get a block, freeze it. Because then before you make a purchase, you actually have to think about it while it thaws. All joking aside, it may be what the pause you need sometimes. thinking about walking, cycling, we all have a U-Pass. Make it yourself. You know, Christmas is coming and there's always so much pressure around that. What about the gift of time instead of buying someone something or making them something? Because I can tell you that the older I get, the more I appreciate your time than something that you're going to give me that I'm going to use up. So finding cheap recreation. I don't know if you guys use the library at all, but I have, like, because we didn't have all the fancy channels or HBO, I watched all of Game of Thrones by taking it out from my local library. And I put it on the hold shelf. So because I put it on hold, all I had to do was walk in the library. I didn't have to look for it. It was free and it was on the hold shelf in alpha order and I could just grab it and leave. So sometimes it's rethinking how you're doing stuff. Tap into the campus resources. You know, things are rolling again. We're kind of sort of back to what we're going to call normal again. But, you know, going over to the gym, there's lots of free activities around. Yes, you know, it's a community campus, but I know from my own experience, you get out of it what you put into it. I volunteered at the radio station for a couple of years, and that was a lot of fun. And it was a great way to meet people who liked music or, you know, were kind of into the same thing I was. So at the beginning of every term, there's always clubs day. It's a great way to meet your people, you know, and it's kind of cool because it's just different ways that you can value add your degree that won't necessarily cost you anything. So just some ideas how you can reduce your spending. SFU-based financial aid. So we have bursaries and work study, which we would consider needs-based funding. And then we have scholarships and awards. So no one likes talking that much about bursaries and work study because we don't like to admit that we might be in a position of financial deficit or we need money. And scholarships and awards, frankly, only recognize merit. They are very, very competitive. Bursaries are not competitive. So with our bursary, all of our SFU-based funding, you apply online. They're available every term. And in your very first term at SFU, you can apply for bursaries. So I know that all of you guys are already in your first term, that deadline has come and gone, or you may be farther along in your degree. But it's just good information to know. But bursaries are based on, as I mentioned, demonstrated financial need, which is a wonderfully vague term. And people want to know, well, how do I demonstrate financial need? Well, what we do is when you apply for a bursary, we look at what kind of resources do you have? We assume that everyone has some kind of resources to be able to go to school. If you're living away from home, we're going to expect that you have a little bit more. If you're living at home, we're going to expect that you have a little less because you have different expenses. In the bursary application, we do ask whether or not you have any assets. This is one of the areas where people make a lot of mistakes because they start listing all their parents' assets in this section. If it's not yours, you don't list it because if you list your parents' resources, it makes you look well off. So a lot of students make that mistake, and it's an honest mistake because people are just trying to fill out the application as best as they can. Okay, my parents have a house, we've got 2 cars. Oh yeah, I guess we should put the computer. And you over declare. If it's not in your name, it's not your asset. So when you're applying for bursaries, in the very beginning, we're asking for some very specific questions. Trying to screen, are you on exchange? Are you on international co-op? Are you in a field school? Do you have a disability? Do you have any volunteer experience? Even if you say no to all of those bursaries, it doesn't mean you're not eligible. It just means we're trying to filter out for very, very specific types of funding. So you'll answer a whole bunch of no's and then you'll get into the application. We're not asking you for how much it's going to cost you to go to school because we use what is called a standard assessment so that we're treating all students the same so that it's equal playing field in that way. So our bursary application for spring will open up December 19th and you can apply until January 13th. If you are interested in work study, the application is now open and it will close on Friday. Work study is on-campus research-based opportunities, and you could be working for a prof where you're doing their research. You could be working for SF PERG. You could be working for childcare. You could be doing animal care. We have a lot of really interesting positions on campus. You can work up to about 140 hours. And it's meant to be flexible around your student's schedule. So it's one of those things where if you don't have any work experience, you don't think you're going to do co-op, it might be something to help because it does go on your co-curricular record. And it could help you later on say, hey, I may not have done jobs, but I've done some work study positions. So it's something to consider. I also know students who through their work study have made a really, really strong connection with their professors and have gone on to do a master's because they have made that connection. So just throwing it out there again, it comes back to what do you want out of your degree? So bursaries are not a guaranteed source of funding. We send decisions out to SFU email addresses and we notify students at the end of the second month of school. So we tell students not to count on them. They come end of the second month, beginning of the third month, because we know at that point, students are starting to feel the financial pinch in the term. I think I duplicated that slide, sorry about that. But I wanted to give you guys a look at what, if you guys go into your Go SFU account, this is what it would look like when you click on the link, I want to apply for a bursary. What you see there is it'll have a little live link that says apply now. And this is from spring 2022, but it kind of gives you an idea of what to look for. Once you've successfully submitted your application, this is what it's going to look like. You'll see the review button there on the left. It'll show submitted, and then it'll tell you when you have the chance to actually take a look at it. You will not be able to amend it at that point, but at least you know that you've submitted it. If you log in and it doesn't say submitted, you haven't clicked all the right boxes. I'll just pause. There any questions about bursaries and work study? So the tuition deadline always happens before the bursary deadline. So this fall, the tuition deadline was September 20th, which is why we tell students not to count on bursary funding, that it's meant to be more supplemental funding. So if you have not paid your tuition and fees and you've applied for a bursary, then if you get a bursary, we'll use your bursary to pay your tuition and fees first. And then if your account is at zero, we would then refund that money out to you. Great question, thank you. So SFU scholarships have a minimum CGPA of 3.5, and you need to be enrolled in at least 12 units. Our scholarships, we post the list of available scholarships on our website, usually in the beginning of December, the beginning of April, or the beginning of August. As I mentioned, you do need to have a CGPA of 3.5, and they are really, really competitive. So we have less scholarships than I would say than open scholarships. I would encourage every student, if you're around a 3.5, aim for the 3.67, because the open scholarship is guaranteed if you meet the eligibility criteria. Our scholarships, as I mentioned, are extremely competitive. The bare minimum is a 3.5. If you know you have a guaranteed scholarship, if you can hit a 3.67, stay home more, less TV, more work. No, I'm just kidding. But really try to aim for that 3.67. We also do, I'm not sure if there's any graduate students, but there are graduate scholarships and awards. And you would go through grad studies at that point.
I do have another question.
Yeah.
Do you need to be a full-time student to receive a bursary?
Yes, you need to be in at least 9 units or more to be able to apply for and qualify for a bursary. If you're a student with a permanent disability and have either student ABC funding that shows that, or you're working with our Center for Accessible Learning, you can be considered for bursaries with only 6 units.
Another one is, how much is the open scholarships?
So the open scholarship varies between $70 and $120 per unit that you're enrolled in. So for example, I think this semester it was either 100 or 110 per unit. So if you were in 10 units, 10 times 100, it was a minimum of $1,000.
Great, and I do have a question about international graduate students. Maybe we can get to that question.
What's the question?
What are options for international graduate students? In my research, I found many.
So as an international grad, you can apply for bursaries. Anything around scholarships or RA or TA ships, you need to talk to your department and the Department of Graduate Studies. They do have what they call the GA3 database that you can take a look through. So unfortunately for grad students, we do bursaries and work study, but we do not do the scholarships and awards. Great question. Thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. SFU awards, we do every term as well. So the difference between scholarships and awards is that scholarships are based purely on your academics. Our scholarships go to the top scholar under each category. SFU awards, you can apply for in your first term. You need to be a full-time student in at least 9 units in good academic standing. And they're looking for what other stuff, not just your GPA. So they're looking for volunteer experience, community involvement, exceptional circumstances, and you can apply for those every single term. If you are someone who has a lot of volunteer work, we do have service awards, and we do service awards once per year. So we'll do service awards March 27th. We will post the list of what awards we have late February, early March. The list of awards is with the list of scholarships, and that gets posted on our website beginning of December for the spring term. And this is just a quick snapshot of our dates and deadlines. And it lets you know when we will let students know whether or not they're eligible. For our awards and scholarships, we will not send a notification out to students. If you were not eligible, if you log into your student account, you'll just see a nil assessment. We will send a notification to all students who have applied for bursaries and work study. For students who may not get a bursary or work study, we will open it up for questions. So if you apply and don't get a bursary, feel free to respond and ask questions about that. You all get an emergency alert? Yeah, I think everyone got buzzed right now. So we saw the feeling go, everyone look at your phone. It's all good, right? Okay, good. We hope. Okay, so sorry about that. Just when the buzz started going all the way around, I know it's not just me. But yeah, so these are our dates and deadlines. So bursary and work study, you would get a notification. If you're not successful for scholarships and awards, we will not send you a notification. If you've applied for a scholarship and you don't get one, there is nothing that you could have done better in your application. Please know it's just they're that competitive, and that's why we talk about the open scholarship being way more important. That because if we only offer, say in a term, 45 scholarships, and we have 1,000 people applying for those 45, the GPA is going to get pushed quite high. For the open scholarship, it's not, if you make that bar and you meet the criteria, you're there. For a bursary, it doesn't matter what your GPA is, as long as you're in good academic standing. If you have demonstrated financial need through our process, we're going to try to help. Any questions? Nope, good, we're quiet, perfect. These are some SFU resources that I just wanted to draw your attention to. Our financial aid and award website overall. If you receive any scholarships, awards, bursaries from SFU, or you overpay your student account, make sure you sign up for direct deposit. This is just those kind of instructions. I've put a link for the academic dates and deadlines, FCAT awards, and then I've also included a list here for our external scholarships, awards, and bursaries. So this is a database that you can access through our website, through financial aid and awards under scholarships, and it's down at the very bottom of the page, or use this as a reference. But all scholarships and awards that we're aware of outside of SFU, we collect in this PDF. Some may be eligible for international students. Many of them may be just for Canadian, but definitely it's take a look. If you're going to apply for external scholarships and awards, I would suggest have a template, so that you've already got your mission statement, that you know what you're out there going to do, so that when you're applying for scholarships and awards outside of SFU, you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. You can just take your information, lift and shift kind of thing. This is the part where it now shifts more into domestic students. If we have any international students who are here, essentially as an international student at SFU, you can apply for our bursaries and our work study program. You are also eligible to apply for our scholarships and our awards. And I would encourage you to take a look at what other parts do you want for your experience. There is an SFU temporary pool for work for students, and you may also want to consider co-op. We do recognize it is expensive as an international student to attend. So it's how do you make it so that your degree can potentially be more affordable? So shifting into that, I want to talk a little bit about student loans and grants. Students apply through their province of residence. Most students are from BC, but we do have students from all across Canada. You apply for full-time funding online. This also means that you need to have your own personal bank account and ID. And here we have students apply for funding on a term-by-term basis. Through Student Aid BC, students can check their dashboard for any updates. If you're applying for full-time government student financial assistance, it's really important to know that all of the federal grants have been doubled for the 2022-2023 program year. This is the final year that we know of for the COVID-19 relief that they provided. So back in 2020, 2021, normally the Canada student grants are $1,500 per term. It has been doubled to $3,000 per term. So if you've never considered applying for government student aid, it is something that you should think about or at least consider. Students apply one online application and they're automatically considered for all types of funding. In BC, that includes Canada student loans, BC student loans, and grants. Grants is the part of the money that you do not have to pay back. There's grants for full-time students, students with permanent disabilities, for students with children, for students that have been out of school for more than 10 years, as well as the BC Access Grant. You are automatically considered for all types of funding that you are eligible for. Lots of people ask, how much can I get? So as a single student without dependents, you can get about $5,400 in Canada and BC student loans per term. You could also receive up to $29.42 in the Canada student grants for full-time students per term. You could get an additional $500 per term in BC Access Grant. And if you've been out of school for more than 10 years, you can also get an additional $784. If you have a permanent or persistent or a prolonged disability, there's up to about $5,300, pardon me, per term that you could also apply for. These all represent the maximum funding that you could get per term. And as you see, if your family income is in a certain threshold, if you apply for student loans and grants, you could get about $3,500 per term in grants, which is money you do not have to pay back. If you don't want to keep the loan, there is no penalty for keeping the grant and paying the loans back right away. Student loans are interest-free while you're full-time. BC student loans are interest-free at this point for life, and Canada student loans are interest-free for the 6 months after you graduate, and then it's at a very fair interest rate after that point. This is the Student Aid BC website. This is where students go to apply for funding through BC. You need to have a Service BC card, whether or not it's attached to your BC driver's license or a standalone Service BC card. That is what you would use to log into this website. You need to go through an identity verification process. So your ID does have to be BC issued photo ID, but to make sure that they're issuing the funding to the right person. The first time you apply for funding, it will take about a month. In future terms, it'll only take probably, your application may be approved overnight or within a couple of days, and funding usually is out within 5 to 7 business days. If you apply for student loans, the first day you can get a student loan is the very first day of school. So right now you could apply for a student loan for spring, but you're not going to get the funding, even if it's been approved, until January 4th, because that is the first day of the spring term.
I have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Do international graduate students have the option of getting student loans?
No, because if they're American, yes, they can get a loan through the United States, but we do not offer student loans to graduate students. Depending on what country you're from, international students may be able to apply for loans through their home country. I know we have Indian students who are able to apply through India and through other countries. So it would be checking with your home country. In Canada or in BC, you can also apply for part-time government student financial assistance. As an undergraduate, we consider part-time between 3 and 8 units in any given term. This is a paper-based application right now. And how I mentioned that all Canada grants have been doubled. If you're studying between 3 and 8 units, a lot of students sometimes study part-time in the summer. If you're Canadian, you can get up to $3,600 as a grant to study part-time. So we talk about that as a debt management tool, even if you don't want to apply for student loan funding. Maybe your parents make a lot of money or they've got savings. If you're studying part-time is based on your income as opposed to your parents' income. So we encourage students to apply for the part-time funding because most of the time, what students are receiving is grant funding only. So it seems way too easy to be true. But we have found that when I first started at SFU, probably about 40 students a year applied for part-time funding, and now about 2,000 students apply for part-time. There is no hitch. As a single student, if you're from BC and you make less than 32,000, which is most students that I know, you will qualify for max grant funding. So every summer, if you took 1 or 2 classes, you're making money by applying for this grant. So I thoroughly encourage you to learn about it and at least make an informed decision if you choose not to take grant funding. Repayment, as I mentioned, just more so that it's all eyes wide open. Canada student loans are interest-free while you're full-time. BC student loans are interest-free. You end up having a 6-month, you start repayment 6 months after you leave full-time school. You can make payments anytime with no penalty. You can take a term off because a term is normally 4 months long. And there is also something called repayment assistance if you're having problems paying your loans back. We have many students that maybe go to school for a couple of terms and take 1 or 2 terms off. You would go into repayment. If you can't afford the payments, you do the repayment assistance or you make the 2 payments. Then when you become a full-time student again, you either apply for a new loan or you apply for interest-free status to let the government know you're back in school. Your payments stop. Everything shifts back to interest-free, and then later on you'll get another 6-month grace period. It doesn't mean that you have to go to school continuously. You can take time off. You can go into repayment. You can return to school. So it's just something to be mindful of if you do choose to take out Canada student loans. And again, you apply for the province through which you reside. If you're under 22, your residency is tied to what province your parents lived in. If you're over 22, it's tied to where you were from. This is the National Student Loan Service Center online website. Students apply for funding through their province and the funding gets dispersed through the National Student Loan Service Center. So if you ever apply for part-time or full-time funding, you will also end up creating an account through the National Student Loan Service Center. This is where students can view their student loan information, make sure that funding has been issued, and make sure if they need to apply for repayment assistance, this is where they would do so. We've kind of reached the end of our basic tour about financial aid here at SFU. So if you have any questions, I'm not going anywhere right now. So feel free to ask away, or I'll hang out for a little bit if you have any questions that you have to ask me just in the room.
Is there a specific website where you can find those resources, or
Which resources?
is there like a one page where you can kind of navigate all like the work study, bursaries, scholarships?
Yep. So if you go to the financial aid website under undergraduate, it's all there.
If I can just click on your, goes on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just, there's not always a button.
If you wanted to pull up that website, you're welcome.
Yes.
Okay.
So that is, so if you need one,
I'll
always
have
say.
it. He looked great.
Then you will have side.
Gotcha.
This-
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Gonna stop.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. It's recording. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you go to the basic SFU financial aid website, on the left-hand side, it'll have a link that says undergraduate. You click on undergraduate, it'll open up and there'll be information about scholarships, awards, bursaries, work study, exchange in field school, former youth and care, Indigenous students, and about loans. So everything is there as one splash page and then it'll branch off. Great question.
If anyone has any more questions, just drop them in the chat or anyone in the room. If there's a big question. Yeah, if that's all right, you can always just email me and I can share the slides.
Yep,
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Provide-
just PDF them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm changing them around.
Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
When starting position, I'm trying to see the list of available positions.
And you cannot.
And it says it reopens at November 21st. Is it because all the positions already filled?
No, we only open up the work study. So you need to apply for work study eligibility. And then if you're eligible, we'll actually give you a password to the work study website at that point. And you can only view it if you're eligible. And you can apply for work study, be eligible, take a look at the list and go, not this term. And then we'll automatically relook at your application as a bursary. So good question, because I didn't actually say that in the presentation. So if you apply for work study, we will automatically relook at you as a bursary. If you participate in work study, it will just be an additional resource that we will consider. If you apply for work study and are eligible and choose not to participate, again, we'll just relook at you for a bursary instead.
So you could get either bursary or work study. but
You
not
could
both.
potentially get both.
Oh.
Yeah.
And is there a maximum hours that are given?
140 per term.
Per term, right?
Yeah.
So I see. All right, thanks.
Welcome.
I have a question in the chat. Can we still apply for PT student loans this term?
Until the 20th. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I would encourage you to get an application, and if you're part-time, apply. We have instructions on how to apply for the part-time funding on our website. So if you go to the contact us page, it has a direct link to our part-time page. Because it is really specific, and when you look at the part-time application, it will tell you that it cannot be emailed. And we don't want you to come in to bring us a part-time. We are okay. The government has said we can accept them by email. We will not let you come and see us to give us a part-time app. We want you to email it to us. So make sure you print it out, sign it, fill it out, email it to us. All of that is on our website. Great question.
Can I apply for the multiple financial aids and hours at the same time?
Yes. Yep, you could potentially get a bursary and a scholarship, or a bursary award and a scholarship. Absolutely. And when you apply for scholarships and awards, we ask you to apply for a specific scholarship and award. For a bursary, you just submit an application, and we would, if you're eligible, we'll tell you what bursary we matched you with. So you don't have to tell us what bursary, we'll just automatically tell you. Good question.
I don't know if it's an appropriate question to ask here, but I have this funding guarantee from my advisor, which has a fixed amount. Do you think it will affect the funding guarantee that I get from the advisor, or?
You'd have to ask them, but I would assume no.
Okay, in principle. it
In
should-
principle, it should not. Because if, are you a grad student?
Yes.
So you've been told that you maybe have like a $19,000 scholarship, so you get, yeah, so 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. And so when you apply for a bursary, we know that as a grad student, it's probably gonna cost you about $9,000 per term. So we already know that there's at least a gap of 2,500. And they know that there's a gap. 6,500 does not pay for everything. Yeah. So I would encourage you to apply for a bursary return. You're welcome.
A couple of people are leaving.
Yep, which is fair.
Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead and leave or stay and ask them a question.
Yes, yeah. So essentially, this is the end of the formal part of the presentation. Essentially, if you don't have questions, have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Hey.
So is it okay if I just grab some names so I can check out if you want the slides, I can email them to you? Yeah. Yeah. Just a couple.
And did that answer your questions? Or is there stuff that wasn't covered that you would have liked covered? Since you guys are all still here.
I've seen the database, I've seen how that. I don't know if you have like a as the count.
Don't, I have screenshots. So on that one, would it be useful every term to have, this is how you fill out a bursary app and it's literally page by page, is that useful?
There's that database.
So the database is useless in the sense that, yes, you can look at all the scholarships, bursaries and awards we have, but it doesn't mean they're available any term. So when I talk about the fact at the beginning of say December, we're gonna post a list of what scholarships we have. That's the list you need to go from.
Okay.
So the database we have is lovely, but it doesn't mean it's not out that term. So I would spend, so if you bring up, because you're here. So if you bring up the SFU financial aid awards, like just Google SFU financial aid. Click on there. Yeah. You're very welcome. And then click on undergrad.
Thank you.
And then click on scholarships. Scroll up, and then on the right hand side under how to apply, we will post the list over there on the right hand side.
Okay.
And on that PDF, it'll say this is the scholarships. And that's where I would say don't. I find it frustrating that we have this database. And it just, I think it creates way more questions where it's like, you're very welcome. Look at the scholarships and awards we have. But it doesn't mean we have the money or the donors give us money to donate. So, good feedback.
Oh,
No worries.
Thank you for that. That's awesome. I just read that. That's okay. It's
Oh.
the registration.
Oh.
I should have made that clear.
I still would have answered you the same either way.
Yeah, I have a responsibility. You can email me.
Yeah.
It's on the Eventbrite page. Why is that?
So see, yeah, so we'll post the list here for all scholarships and awards, and if you scroll down to the bottom, as an advisor, you're telling people where to go, that's where I would go to that external link. So that's the stuff outside of SFU that we keep fairly current. Like, you know, it's just when we have staffing that we can actually go through and pick through it. But we post all that we know about outside of SFU here, but if it's not on our list, like say in December, it means we don't have it.
Thank you so much.
Or we don't have the donors. Yeah. So that's where I would say, don't just like, yeah, you could go and look at it and say, oh yeah, we've got lots. But if it's not, if we don't have it, yeah. Send them to the list and the list a month before classes start, or a couple, like around the time that we post it opens, it'll usually be about a week. And the scholarship and award, like for scholarships, it's literally top GPAs. So most of the time they're not asking for reference or anything. It could be just as basic as your resume, or like one of them, you have to live in the Kootenays, prove you lived in the Kootenays. Like, yeah, because scholarships are so competitive and it takes so much time to review a whole application package. Like say for our Courage to Come Back awards, we have 5 and we usually get 80 to 100 people who apply and they're all feedback. And so you get people to put together these